Believer is hailed as the pinnacle of Korean anti-drug remakes, and to this day, it's the best drug crime movie I've ever reviewed. Although this film was adapted from the Chinese version, because South Korea abolished its film censorship system, the movie's boldness goes far beyond the original. Not only are the characters vividly portrayed, but each character's backstory could stand alone as its own film. Whether it's the character design, or the wild, unhinged performances, everything reveals the ruthlessness and determination of each organization. To sum it up in one line, the entire movie is filled with maniacs, and there isn't a single normal person. No more talking. If you haven't checked it out yet, now's the time. We open in an abandoned factory in Korea, where a white sedan slowly approaches, and as it comes to a stop, out steps a woman in striking black stockings with a flamboyant look, heading straight toward the factory ahead. But in the very next second, fortunately, the woman wasn't seriously hurt, only a few scrapes. But having barely escaped death, she didn't feel safe at all, so she drove straight to the police station, desperate for protection. When the main character Won-ho entered the room, he instantly recognized the woman before him.
오연호, 당신이 제 발로 여길 걸어 들어와.
Oh Yun-ok never expected Won-ho to actually know her, and just as she was caught off guard,
연옥 페인트 오연옥 회장. 이 선생 후견이자 실세?
Hearing this, Oh Yun-ok stopped beating around the bush and directly asked Won-ho if he wanted to catch Mr. Lee. She said she could help him, but only if he promised to let her hide inside the police station. She also revealed that she had almost been silenced just now, and if Mr. Lee found out she was still alive, he would definitely come for her. But Won-ho wasn't naive, so he pressed her. Why would Mr. Lee want to kill you? Oh Yun-ok claimed she didn't know, explaining that while working with Mr. Lee, there had already been 2 explosions, each one a so-called cleanup. This time, she believed it was the same. As she spoke, she revealed the location of the drug factory, telling Won-ho to go there and see for himself if the bodies inside were actually the heads of certain territories. Hearing this, Won-ho pressed further. So who exactly is Mr. Lee? But Oh Yun-ok said she truly didn't know, insisting that Mr. Lee never appeared in person, and only pulled the strings from behind the scenes. Won-ho immediately ordered his men to head to the drug factory location mentioned by Oh Yun-ok. When his men entered the factory, all they could see was devastation everywhere, along with piles of drug-making equipment. As the search continued, they even found one survivor at the scene, as well as a severely injured dog. After receiving his men's report, Won-ho came to the interrogation room where Oh Yun-ok was held, only to see her devouring the food in front of her. But just after a few bites, she suddenly struggled to breathe and collapsed face first onto the plate. This sight made Won-ho grit his teeth in fury. He never imagined Mr. Lee would be so audacious, daring to kill someone inside the police station. Right as Won-ho was fuming, one of his team members called him, saying that the only survivor they rescued had disappeared from the hospital room. Startled, Won-ho rushed to the hospital, and as soon as he entered, he found that his team had already spotted the survivor's figure on the surveillance cameras, so he followed the footage straight to the location. There, the survivor was seen mourning over a dead body, and Won-ho brought him back to the station for questioning, but Young Rak stayed completely silent, leaving Won-ho unsure of what to even ask. After that, Won-ho brought up the clues they had found, including the dog that was still alive, hoping to provoke a reaction from Young Rak. To his surprise, it actually worked. When Young Rak heard the dog had survived, he immediately asked Won-ho, "How is that dog doing?" Hearing this, Won-ho showed Young Rak a photo of the dog, then even brought him to see the poor animal being treated. Seeing the dog's miserable state, Won-ho said, "Mr. Lee is a monster. Anyone who disobeys him ends up dead." Young Rak then asked, "Can you really catch him, Won-ho?" He said that although he didn't know who Mr. Lee really was, he could provide some intel. Inside the interrogation room, Young Rak explained, over the years, many people have pretended to be Mr. Lee, real and fake all mixed together, and because of all the suspicion, one of my bosses even got his hand chopped off. Won-ho seized the chance and said, "So that's why Mr. Lee wanted to start over again?" But Young Rak countered, "Nobody knew about that factory. I was only there because I came back early from a trip. I was supposed to meet a partner named Sean tomorrow and introduce him to a Chinese buyer for drug materials, but then all this happened." Hearing this, Won-ho felt like he had caught something important, so he pressed Young Rak, "Do you know Sean? Could he pretend to be Sean and meet that buyer instead?" Had Sean ever met the buyer Jean Harim? Young Rak answered, "Very few people have ever seen Jean Harim in person, and Sean definitely hasn't." In an instant, Won-ho understood, so he and his team started planning, preparing the gear for him to impersonate Sean when meeting Jean Harim, and also preparing props for him to disguise as Jean Harim when facing Sean. After the team spent what felt like 98 minutes getting ready, Young Rak led Wonho to the hotel where Jean Harim was staying. As soon as they reached the door, they saw a man with his head covered in blood stumble inside, and once they entered, they saw another man dressed only in pajamas. Recognizing Jean Harim, Young Rak quickly bowed to him, but Jean Harim walked straight past him toward Wonho, extending his bloodied hand for a handshake. Wonho quickly introduced himself, "I'm Sean Chong," but Jean Harim said nothing, only giving Wonho a cold glance before sitting at the bar, waiting for his eccentric wife to come bandage his hand. Seeing this, Wonho and Young Rak quickly moved to the living room to wait. On Young Rak's tie was a small decorative pin, but in reality it was a tiny hidden camera, with the police monitoring every move inside. Just as they sat down, the freshly bandaged Jean Harim walked over with a bottle of alcohol straight toward Wonho.
너 누구냐?
예, 제가 오늘 뵙기로 했던
네가 이 선생이냐?
아닙니다.
나는 이 선생 보러 왔다.
Hearing this, Wonho could only respond with the lines he had prepared. Luckily, after listening to the explanation, Jean Harim didn't press further and sat down across from them. At that moment, Jean Harim's wife Borayan walked in. She pulled Young Rak aside saying she wanted to change his tie, but the tiny camera hidden on the tie was taken off by Borayan, who then questioned him, "What's this thing?" Young Rak tried to explain a few words, but Borayan didn't take it seriously and said, "If you're going to buy stuff like this, at least get the real thing. Don't waste money on knockoffs." Saying that, she tossed the pen into a glass of wine nearby, instantly cutting off the police from all live surveillance of the scene. After that small interruption, Jean Harim got straight to the point, pulling out 2 eyeballs and pouring liquor into the glass, clearly signaling to Wonho that if he wanted to do business, he had to drink it. Without hesitation, Wonho downed it in one gulp and immediately started chewing. After finishing, he explained to Jean Harim, "Because our factory recently caught fire, Mr. Lee is busy cleaning up the mess, but he will show up personally at the next meeting." Then he brought out the prepared drug sample and said, "This is our new product called Leica." Hearing the word Leica, Borayan instantly lost control. She snatched the drug and handed it to Jean Harim, and the two of them inhaled it together on the spot. As the craving hit, the couple headed to a separate room, leaving only Young Rak and Wonho, but the two had no intention of waiting around, because another meeting was scheduled. Seanchan was supposed to show up today, and Young Rak had only bought them an extra hour. Their time was running out. The two quickly packed up, with Wonho disguising himself as Jean Harim and Soyeon posing as Borayan, waiting together for Seanchan's arrival. Soon, Young Rak was at the door to greet Seanchan, but on Wonho's side, a police officer who had helped set up the scene was just about to leave when Seanchan arrived early, forcing the man to panic and hide, though time was clearly not enough. The very moment Seanchan walked in, Wonho smashed a glass over his head, obviously playing the role of disciplining his underling, exactly like the scene when he met Jean Harim. Seanchan entered and shook Wonho's hand with his bloodied palm, while Wonho mirrored Jean Harim's arrogant attitude and repeated every gesture that had been done to him earlier, perfectly imitating the real Jean Harim. As time passed, their conversation shifted to business, and Seanchan pulled out 2 batches of Leica, one white and one blue, offering them for Wonho to test. Wonho knew that Jean Harim was an addict and would definitely take it, so if he refused he'd blow his cover, but for someone who had never touched drugs, taking such a massive dose for the first time was nearly lethal. After consuming it, Wonho immediately pulled his gun on Seanchan, putting on a deranged act as he warned, "If you don't bring Mr. Lee next time, you'll end up in a very bad way." Staring down the barrel, Seanchan was too terrified to say a word. Wonho quickly retreated to the back room, where the unbearable itching and burning sensation made him collapse on the floor in spasms. His fellow officers rushed to dunk him in ice water to cool his body. Fortunately, after a series of emergency measures, Wonho was dragged back from the brink of death. As the team quickly cleaned up the scene, one officer checked his phone and found a message from Jean Harim agreeing to the deal and promising to provide the raw materials. Wonho knew that at this point, everything was ready, and all they needed was the final push. The next day, Young Rak drove a truck full of raw materials to another drug lab, where 2 mute geniuses were waiting. At the site, Wonho sat in front of the monitors with a sign language interpreter, closely watching every move. The 2 dealers warmly greeted Young Rak, then unloaded the large containers from the truck, and after more than 30 hours of non-stop processing, most of the raw materials had been consumed. Just then, Seanchan arrived with his crew, slipping a check into Young Rak's pocket. After that, another group stepped out of the vehicle, and leading them was Seanchan's boss Brian Lee, known in the underworld as Mr. Lee. Getting out of the car, Brian Lee praised Young Rak's efficiency, leaning close to whisper, "You should join me." But when Brian Lee threw out this olive branch, hinting that he was Mr. Lee himself, young Rak didn't believe it for a second, because too many people had pretended to be Mr. Lee, so he played dumb and asked, "Did this check come from Mr. Lee?" Brian Lee gave no answer, turned around, and left in his car. After that, a call was made to Sean Chong. "Don't use young Rak anymore, find a time to get rid of him." Clearly, Brian Lee felt his authority had been challenged, and his anger left no room for young Rak to exist. But Sean Chong knew that young Rak was the bridge between him and Harim. If young Rak was gone, the delivery of the finished product couldn't be completed, so he had no choice but to agree verbally to Brian Lee. The next day, the two drug-making prodigies completed their work, and young Rak brought the finished product to the place he had agreed on with Won-ho. After letting Won-ho check the goods, young Rak said he would go find Sean Chong, and together they would meet Mr. Lee and Harim for the trade, which could finally give Won-ho the chance to capture Mr. Lee. But out of nowhere, several cars pulled up in front of them, and the woman leading the group was none other than Harim's wife Bo-ryung. Bo-ryung put hoods over both of their heads and dragged them to stand before Harim. Harim questioned them, "Where were you planning to take the car?" Young Rak hurried to explain, "The deal was set for tomorrow, but we didn't expect you to come first." Won-ho added from the side, "We were just trying to show the goods to Mr. Lee, since it's such an important deal." But without a word, Harim pulled the trigger and killed one of Won-ho's colleagues on the spot.
저 선생은 이 선생도 아니고 이 잡새고.
The two knew their covers were blown, so Won-ho stood up and said, "I surrender. Please don't kill me." That scene actually amused Harim, but in the very next instant, as Harim let down his guard for just a second,
너 괜찮아, 임마.
his colleague quickly checked his bulletproof vest, and luckily the injury wasn't serious, so Won-ho kept chasing after Harim. After a fierce shootout, both sides ran out of bullets, and the fight entered the cold weapon stage. At the start of the brawl, Won-ho had the upper hand and was about to choke out Harim, but Harim clawed at Won-ho's eye, instantly turning the tide. Harim picked up whatever he could from the ground and smashed it at Won-ho, beating him until he had no strength to fight back and was nearly knocked out. Just as Harim was about to lift a dumbbell to finish Won-ho off, his head was suddenly blown apart. The shot came from young Rak, who had rushed in. After taking down Harim, the two left quickly, because their true target was Mr. Lee. And what happened here was just an accident. They first returned to the police station to regroup and gather intel. Then So-yeon disguised herself as Bo-ryung and headed to the agreed trading spot. At the location, Seon Chong was already waiting downstairs, and once they went in, Brian Lee was standing right at the door to greet them. After taking the two away, Brian Lee instructed Seon Chong, "Take young Rak aside first. I want to meet with Harim alone." Clearly, Brian Lee had finished using young Rak and now wanted Seon Chong to get rid of him. Sure enough, as soon as young Rak was taken into a room, he was tied up, and a medical staffer injected him with poison, while Seon Chong stood proudly and said, "This is all on Mr. Lee's orders, so don't blame me when you're gone." On the other side, Brian Lee took Won-ho into the hall and began introducing himself.
제가 바로 이 선생입니다.
But Won-ho felt something was wrong, saying, "I've known Mr. Lee for a long time. I've always wanted to meet him but never could." When a person becomes obsessed with someone, they develop a strange kind of belief. But right now I just feel something doesn't add up. Clearly, he didn't believe the Brian Lee in front of him was the real Mr. Lee. Brian Lee was instantly enraged. He hated nothing more than people doubting he was Mr. Lee. So he called in his men, ready to take out Won-ho and So-yeon. Just then, as the tension was at its peak, a staff member walked in pushing a food cart, leaving Won-ho and the others puzzled as they asked, "What's this?"
그거 뭐냐고요?
이 선생님께서 보내셨습니다.
Won-ho immediately mocked, "This is something you ordered, and you don't even know what it is?" Brian Lee stepped forward and opened the box. Inside was a severed hand, with the phone still dialing Mr. Lee. The moment Won-ho picked up the call, a smoke grenade was tossed into the elevator, and men rushed out amid the chaos, turning the place upside down. In the confusion, Brian Lee tried to escape, but Won-ho tackled him to the ground and the two began a brutal fistfight. Just as Won-ho gained the upper hand, his shoulder was pierced by a bullet. Turns out the real target was Brian Lee. After capturing Brian Lee, They dragged him to the room where Young Rak was, and the people in front of him removed their hoods, revealing themselves to be Young Rak's two close friends, the drug-making prodigies. And nearby was Sian Chan, dead and missing an arm. Brian Lee was stunned. As a man pulled up a chair and sat in front of him, it was none other than Young Rak, the true Mr. Lee who had been copied by so many. Brian Lee shouted impossible, but Young Rak replied, "I've already killed 9 fake Mr. Lees, and I don't even know how many more are out there. This is the first time someone has gone this far. Even I was shocked. Not only did you copy my methods and blow up everyone in the factory, but you also took out Oyanoke inside the police station, using the exact same style as me." As soon as he finished speaking, Young Rak ordered the prodigies to coat Brian Lee's back with tar, then burned a scar into him with a flamethrower, shaped exactly like his beloved dog's wound. After finishing, Young Rak called Wonho and told him that Mr. Lee Brian Lee was on the first floor. Wonho rushed over and saw Brian Lee. His back nearly burned to a crisp, but he never believed Brian Lee was Mr. Lee anyway. And then he remembered how the man had reacted strongly when the dog's name Leica was mentioned, proving the dog was indeed called Leica. Yet when he went to the pet hospital, the dog had already been taken away by Young Rak. At that moment, Wonho finally understood that the real Mr. Lee was actually Young Rak all along, but Brian Lee had already been presented to the press by the police as the so-called Mr. Lee. And even though Wonho knew the truth, he had no evidence and no authority to catch Young Rak, leaving him no choice but to resign in frustration. That's where the story ends. See you in the next one.